it, but we're working hard to make sure we're putting the best product out on the court, and our officiating then.
Chaos erupted in Gamebridge's Fieldhouse when a single pointed finger turned an ordinary playoff moment into a wildfire of controversy, exposing cracks in the WNBA's handling of fans, player emotions, and accountability on the biggest stage. Alicia Gray of the Atlanta Dream, visibly frustrated after a rough night on the court, suddenly spun around mid-game and signaled aggressively toward a section of Indiana Fever supporters. Within seconds, security rushed in, removing a confused couple from their seats as television cameras quickly cut away, leaving viewers stunned and social media buzzing. In that tense moment, it looked like something serious had gone down, the kind of ugly incident that demands instant action. Atlanta's narrative was clear. Their star player had been disrespected, and the Dream were victims of vile behavior. The problem? That story began to unravel almost as quickly as it was built, exposing not just a false accusation, but a desperate attempt to shift the focus from a lopsided scoreboard to the stands. What was supposed to be a dramatic show of force turned into an embarrassing display of misdirection as the truth started to seep out. Witnesses immediately took to social media, and their accounts didn't match what Atlanta was selling. The supposed incident wasn't some shocking act of hate or vulgarity. It was a routine bit of playoff heckling, the kind every athlete hears when tensions run high. According to multiple people seated near the ejection, the most inflammatory comment anyone heard was a fan shouting encouragement to Lexi Hull. "You're good, Lex." "She's not even trying anymore." Hardly a verbal attack, and clearly aimed at boosting Hull rather than tearing down Gray. Yet somehow, this benign comment snowballed into an overblown fiasco that saw paying fans escorted out of their seats in front of a national audience. Even more telling, those same fans were later brought back to their exact seats, with security apologizing and explaining that the removal was merely protocol to calm the player down. That single detail destroyed Atlanta's version of events. If the situation had been as serious as initially implied, there is no scenario where security brings people right back into the game after a brief timeout. It revealed the entire moment for what it was: a player unable to handle the pressure, lashing out at fans to mask her own poor performance. The fallout was instant. By the next morning, clips of the ejection flooded social platforms, and commentators began dissecting every frame. Fans noticed the inconsistencies, from Gray's exaggerated reaction to the lack of any visible disturbance in the crowd. Narratives started to shift, and the so-called incident was being labeled a hoax, a desperate ploy to redirect blame. People remembered earlier controversies, like Angel Reese's own accusations that sparked chaos earlier in the season, and couldn't help but draw parallels. The Dream's credibility crumbled while the Fever's focus only sharpened. It became painfully obvious. One team was busy spinning a lie while the other was spinning the scoreboard. And the scoreboard wasn't close. Indiana wasn't just competing. They were dominating, fueled by a roaring home crowd that refused to let this historic night slip away. While Atlanta scrambled to control the narrative, Indiana was too busy rewriting their own history. For the first time since 2016, Gainbridge Fieldhouse hosted a home playoff game, and the Fever seized that opportunity with ferocity. The atmosphere was electric red now. You know, shirts blanketed the stands, and the noise was deafening from the opening tip. These fans had waited nearly a decade for this moment, and they were going to make every second count. The Fever, short-handed and without their biggest star, Caitlin Clark, didn't just rise to the occasion, they elevated the entire city. Even before the game tipped off, the energy was different. Coach Stephanie White hammered home a simple message: desperation and urgency must fuel every possession. She had criticized Game 1's lack of intensity, calling out her team for not fighting for loose balls and not playing with the hunger required to survive playoff basketball. Her words weren't just talk. From the opening whistle, Indiana's body language screamed determination. Defensive rotations were crisper, box outs were fiercer, and ball movement flowed as if every player understood their role perfectly. There was no sulking over missing stars like Clark, Sophie Cunningham, Sydney Colson, and others. Instead, the Fever embraced their adversity, leaning on their collective strength. Caitlin herself sat on the bench, cheering wildly, standing for every defensive stop and embodying the fight this team carried. It was a visual symbol that even in absence, her spirit pushed them forward. And then, as the game unfolded, Indiana's stars began to shine one by one. Aaliyah Boston set the tone inside, muscling through defenders and scoring in the paint. Kelsey Mitchell lit up the perimeter, hitting dagger threes that punished every defensive gamble Atlanta tried. Natasha Howard provided glue on both ends, while Lexi Hall locked down Alicia Gray and delivered a buzzer-beating three that ignited the crowd. Even rookie Michaela Timpson, in limited minutes, played with composure beyond her years, adding a crucial 9 points. Every single player contributed, proving this was no one-woman show. It was a statement. Indiana Fever basketball is built on resilience, unity, and relentless effort. By halftime, the dream looked rattled. By the third quarter, they were unraveling. The defining moment came late in that period when Boston scored inside. Petty stole the ball on the next possession, and Hull drilled a deep three at the buzzer. The arena exploded as the Fever took a commanding lead, crushing Atlanta's hopes in an instant. From that point on, the game was never in doubt. Indiana's defense suffocated the dream, holding them to just 60 points on under 38% shooting and a miserable 5-4-19 from beyond the arc. Gray and Ryan Howard, Atlanta's top weapons, were completely neutralized, combining for only 19 points. Every Fever player bought into the defensive game plan, contesting shots without fouling and closing off the paint. It was the kind of performance that doesn't just win games, it sends messages. When the final buzzer sounded, the scoreboard read 77-60. The Fever hadn't just won. They had announced to the league that they were far more than just Caitlin Clark's team. This was about pride, grit, and a refusal to let circumstances define them. As the crowd roared, you could feel the weight of nearly a decade of frustration lifting. Indiana's playoff drought was over, and their future had never looked brighter. Meanwhile, Atlanta was left to grapple with more than just a loss. Their attempt to weaponize a false narrative backfired spectacularly, leaving them exposed and humiliated. Instead of rallying sympathy, they became the villains of their own story. The contrast couldn't be starker while the Fever celebrated a night of triumph. The Dream were drowning in the mess of their own making. And now everything comes down to Game 3, a winner-take-all showdown in Atlanta. For Indiana, the mission is clear. Replicate the suffocating defense, maintain the energy, and silence the doubters once and for all. For Atlanta, desperation will be their only fuel. The stakes couldn't be higher. One team will advance, and the other will be sent home to wonder how it all slipped away. The Fever have already proven they can win without Clark. But can they do it again on the road, in a hostile environment, with everything on the line? Thursday night, we'll answer that question. One thing is certain, no amount of finger-pointing or false accusations will decide this game. The scoreboard never lies, and Indiana has shown they know exactly how to make it speak loudest. If you stand with the Fever, shout it from the rooftops, "I've got the Fever." Rooftops, "I've got the Fever." When the smoke cleared from the chaos, Alicia Gray unleashed with one dramatic finger point. It became glaringly obvious that the Atlanta Dream were not just losing a basketball game, they were losing their grip on reality and credibility. What was meant to be a calculated act to rally sympathy and shift the narrative away from a humiliating performance turned into a humiliating spectacle for the entire league to witness. From the second Gray spun around on live television and pointed at that section of Indiana Fever fans, demanding security action in front of millions watching. The game was no longer just about basketball. It became a test of truth versus manipulation. In that split second, Atlanta wanted to control the storyline. Their star had supposedly been victimized by unruly fans. Their team disrespected by hostile voices in the stands. And the focus should now shift away from their lackluster play to the supposed injustice being suffered. But as the night unfolded, that carefully constructed narrative began to collapse like a house of cards. The cameras didn't capture any ugly confrontation. The microphones didn't pick up any vulgar slurs. And the so-called incident didn't line up with what real, paying fans sitting nearby actually saw and heard. Instead, what emerged was a story of professional athletes crumbling under playoff pressure and choosing to weaponize the fans as scapegoats. Witnesses immediately flooded social media with their accounts. And every single one painted the same picture. Nothing inappropriate was said. The now infamous comment shouted by a fan wasn't even directed at Grit, was encouragement for Lexi Hull. Shouted loudly in a tense playoff atmosphere. "You're good, Lex." "She's not even trying anymore." That was it. No racial slurs, no threats, no insults crossing the line, just standard competitive chatter. Yet somehow, Gray took those words as an attack, responded with nasty language of her own, and set off a chain reaction that saw innocent fans humiliated in front of thousands. Security, forced to act under the league's so-called protocol, removed the fans not because they were guilty, but because the player needed to cool off. The most damning detail: those very fans were escorted back to their exact seats later in the game with a full apology from security. That alone obliterated Atlanta's narrative. If this had been a truly serious situation, there would be no scenario where those people returned to their seats, no matter how the player felt afterward. Instead, it proved to everyone watching that this was never about safety or respect. It was about control. Gray wasn't protecting the game. She was protecting herself from the reality of her own failure on the court. The social media firestorm that followed was unlike anything the league had seen all year. Clips of the incident went viral within hours, being replayed and slowed down frame by furious fans. Commentators, analysts, and even former players weighed in. And the overwhelming consensus was clear. This wasn't just an overreaction. It was an embarrassing attempt to deflect from a total collapse. The comparisons to earlier controversies were unavoidable. Many fans immediately recalled Angel Reese's earlier drama, where accusations had been made and later proven exaggerated, fueling what people now call fake hoaxes designed to paint Fever fans in a negative light. The narrative being pushed was simple and damaging. Indiana's passionate supporters were being vilified by players and organizations that simply couldn't handle the pressure of true playoff basketball. The league's response only added fuel to the fire. Instead of a clear, consistent explanation, conflicting reports began to circulate. Some outlets framed the incident as harmless heckling blown out of proportion. Others hinted at more serious words being said, but without any evidence or clarity. That inconsistency raised immediate red flags. If you are going to remove paying fans during a playoff game, the details should be crystal clear and the reasoning airtight. Instead, it felt like a sloppy cover-up, and the backlash grew by the hour. Memes exploded online, with fans mocking the idea that a simple comment like "she's not even trying anymore" could trigger such a meltdown. Hashtags like #FeverStrong and #FansMatter began trending as people rallied behind the ejected couple, turning them into symbols of the larger battle between passionate supporters and hypersensitive athletes. By Monday morning, the narrative had flipped entirely. Atlanta wasn't seen as victims, they were seen as aggressors who had attempted to weaponize false accusations to hide their own shortcomings. Alicia Gray, once respected for her competitive spirit, was now being roasted online as the face of fragility. Fans flooded her social media with comments pointing out how easily she cracked under basic playoff pressure. The phrase "bozo outfits" even trended after a commentator angrily declared that players acting like this should be wearing clown suits instead of uniforms. Meanwhile, while the dream flailed in a storm of their own making, the Fever kept their focus exactly where it needed to be, on the scoreboard and on making history. Gainbridge Fieldhouse was electric, the kind of playoff environment most franchises dream of creating. Red Now shirts blanketed the lower bowl, and the roar of the crowd shook the very foundation of the arena. This wasn't just a game for Indiana, it was a long-awaited rebirth. The last time they hosted a home playoff game, Tamika Catchings was still on the court and Stephanie White was still drawing up plays nearly a decade ago. Since then, the franchise had endured heartbreak, irrelevance, and endless rebuilding seasons. But on this night, none of that mattered. Every fan, every player, every coach understood the stakes. Win or the season ends. Game 1's loss in Atlanta had put the Fever's backs against the wall, and Game 2 was a must-win. Add in the fact that Caitlin Clark, the rookie phenom who had transformed the league's viewership and ticket sales, had just been ruled out for the season, and the pressure skyrocketed. Most teams in that situation would have folded before the opening tip. Indiana didn't just survive, they thrived. From the first whistle, their energy was undeniable. Coach White's message about desperation and urgency came through loud and clear. The Fever attacked loose balls like their lives depended on it, moved the ball selflessly on offense, and swarmed defensively with a unity that Atlanta couldn't match. Even without Clark, Sophie Cunningham, and multiple other rotation players, Indiana looked hungrier and sharper than ever. Caitlin herself was on the bench, standing and cheering on every defensive stop, her presence fueling her teammates' determination. The crowd fed off her energy, creating a feedback loop of passion and intensity that made Gainbridge feel like the most hostile environment in the league. And when the Fever began to roll, there was no stopping them. Aaliyah Boston dominated the paint with her strength and footwork, punishing Atlanta's interior defenders. Kelsey Mitchell caught fire from the perimeter, raining down three-pointers every time the Dream sagged off to protect the lane. Natasha Howard did the dirty work, her defensive hustle and timely scoring providing balance. Lexi Hull's defense on Alicia Gray was suffocating, turning Gray's night into a disaster, while Hull herself hit clutch shots that brought the crowd to its feet. Even rookie Michaela Timpson rose to the occasion, scoring 9 vital points with a poise beyond her years. The defining stretch came late in the third quarter. Boston muscled in a tough basket, Petty stole the ensuing inbound pass, and Hull drilled a deep three at the buzzer. The sequence was a dagger straight to Atlanta's heart. The arena erupted in a deafening roar as the Fever's lead ballooned to double digits. From that moment on, the Dream never recovered. Their offense stagnated, their defense fell apart, and their body language screamed defeat. Indiana smelled blood and finished the job with ruthless efficiency. When the final horn sounded, the scoreboard read 77-60, and the message was loud and clear. The Fever weren't just here to participate, they were here to conquer. This was their statement game, proof that they could win without their star and that the future of this franchise was brighter than ever. While Atlanta licked their wounds and tried to figure out what went wrong, Indiana basked in the glory of a home playoff win nearly a decade in the making. The crowd didn't just cheer, they celebrated like a curse had been lifted. For the Fever, this wasn't just a victory, it was redemption. Redemption. From the moment the final buzzer echoed through Gainbridge Fieldhouse, and the scoreboard burned with that emphatic 77-60 victory. It was clear that this game would be remembered not just as a win, but as a defining moment in the Indiana Fever's resurgence and the unraveling of the Atlanta Dream's credibility. The Fever didn't simply beat Atlanta, they humiliated them, stripping away their false bravado and exposing the cracks in their character for the entire world to see. What unfolded wasn't just about basketball strategy or execution. It was about heart, willpower, and the unstoppable force of a team united in purpose. In stark contrast, Atlanta descended into chaos, leaning on excuses, controversies, and ultimately a fabricated narrative to distract from their collapse. This wasn't merely a playoff loss for the Dream, it was a public implosion, the self-inflicted wound that will haunt their organization for years to come. As fans filed out of the arena, their chants of fever, ringing through the Indiana night, social media was already ablaze with replays, commentary, and outrage over the now infamous Alicia Gray incident. The narrative that had initially been painted by Atlanta's Camp 1 of victimization and mistreatment was being shredded in real time by overwhelming evidence and witness testimony. Clips slowed to frame-by-frame analysis revealed the truth with painful clarity. There had been no racial slurs, no hostile threats, no out-of-line behavior from Fever fans whatsoever. Instead, the only inappropriate behavior came from Gray herself, who lashed out verbally, misrepresented the situation, and set off a chain reaction that embarrassed not only her team but the entire league. As this truth spread, Atlanta's credibility nosedived. National sports outlets that initially parroted the hostile crowd angle were forced to backpedal, issuing quiet corrections that only further enraged viewers. Fans across the league united in defense of the ejected Indiana supporters, turning them into symbols of integrity versus deceit. Memes flooded timelines with captions mocking the absurdity of Gray's overreaction. One viral post featured the text, "She's not even trying anymore," over an image of a cartoon crying player, perfectly encapsulating how laughable the supposed offense really was. Even neutral observers, fans of neither team, couldn't help but pile on, recognizing that this wasn't just about one isolated moment. It was about a growing pattern of weaponizing false narratives to manipulate public perception. Many pointed out the eerie similarities to past controversies involving Angel Reese and other players who had attempted to vilify Fever fans without evidence. This wasn't the first time Indiana's loyal supporters had been painted as villains. And now, with overwhelming proof on their side, the broader WNBA fanbase began to question how many other incidents had been exaggerated or outright fabricated. The league itself faced intense scrutiny. Why was there no consistent policy for handling fan-player interactions? Why were fans allowed back to their seats after being publicly humiliated if they had truly done something wrong? Those questions went unanswered, and that silence spoke volumes. In the absence of a clear explanation, the public drew its own conclusions. And none of them were flattering to Atlanta or to the league office. The backlash grew so severe that even players from other teams began to speak out. Some did so subtly, liking tweets or posting cryptic messages about accountability and truth. Others were more direct. A former WNBA veteran appeared on a national podcast and tore into Gray's behavior, calling it soft and a disgrace to the competitive spirit. She argued that passionate fan engagement is the lifeblood of the sport, and that trying to weaponize it for personal gain was unforgivable. This sentiment resonated deeply with fans who had long felt unappreciated by certain players and organizations. The Fever's own roster, though careful not to stoke the flames directly, couldn't hide their emotions entirely. During post-game interviews, Kelsey Mitchell and Aaliyah Boston both praised the crowd repeatedly, emphasizing how much the fans' energy fueled their